Hello Internet, Taliesin here, and today we are talking the fate of Sylvanas Windrunner, the escape and plans of the Jailer, the death of the Archon, and the setting for patch 9.2. Because yes, the time has come. At last, we are able to talk about the end cinematic of the Sanctum of Domination raid. A raid and story beat that we were promised would be epic and unlike anything else we've ever seen in WoW before. Big words from the devs. Did this cinematic live up to them? And usual disclaimer before we get started, this is not a reaction video, okay? I've watched this countless times already. I've done a whole 2-hour stream with Evitel giving my thoughts. If you haven't seen this cinematic, this video will be a terrible way of doing so because we are going to be stopping and starting and skipping bits and generally just talking all over it and having a splendid old geeky time. So join us as we ask, where did the Jailer go? Why did Sylvanas go along with his plan for so long? Where does that big gold portal go? And seriously, what is Zovaal even saying half the time? Okay, go, 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 go. So you know how these videos go. I like to go through the cinematic moment by moment and break down and analyze just about every shot in it, pretty much chronologically, but I don't know if that's really the right approach to take this time around, because whereas I think there are delightful technical moments in the crafting of this cinematic, with some cracking visuals and frames and neat little tricks, which I absolutely will still be pointing out and talking about, for most of us, the main significance of this cinematic goes beyond whether it's actually good or not, and is much more tied to what it means for certain characters and their arcs, and the story at large. And whereas usually I would come to that stuff after the technical breakdown, it's such a disproportionately important part of this cinematic that it feels right to start with some of that, especially as reaction to it has been, well, mixed, to say the least, in the community. And I feel I'd like to start by saying that after my first viewing of this cinematic, I was left slightly disappointed. The reason being that, as I said plenty in the lead up to 9.1, there was one thing that I wanted from this cinematic and raid ending more than anything else: an Argus in the sky moment. What I consider to be the best mid-expansion raid cinematic ever was the ending of Tomb of Sargeras in patch 7.2. A nice character moment with Velen and Kil'jaeden, the death of Kil'jaeden, the escape of our heroes, and then, audaciously, outrageously, wonderfully, the revelation that Illidan has kept their escape portal open, and Argus, homeworld of the Eredar and central HQ of Burning Legion, is now in the effing sky, which was represented in the in-game skybox too. And the reason this was so brilliant is because A, it was very, very cool. B, there were over 12 weeks left of the patch when this happened, but what it did was it placed a clear marker which explicitly showed players what would be happening in the story next. It's a planet full of baddies. We're going to it. It's going to be epic. So instead of spending those 12 weeks thinking, I wonder what will happen next, the player base could instead spend that time getting excited about what would happen when we got to that massive planet in the sky. The intrigue and the excitement were about specifics, and that was very satisfying. Now compare that to what I would consider the opposite extreme example, the Nazjatar ending cinematic, where Ashara gets yoinked off by N'Zoth, and while it was a very cool moment and the cinematic, it left players wondering what had just happened and not knowing what was going to happen next. And you might think, hey, not knowing what's going to happen next is a good thing, right? Like, isn't that a compliment? Man, what a great film. I didn't know what was going to happen next. Well, in this case, no, because players were like, so is N'Zoth back? I mean, I guess he's back, but is it actual N'Zoth or is it weird smoky N'Zoth? Like, is he in immediate danger or something that we will come to much later? I don't really see anything bad happening in the world. Maybe it's not such a big deal, but I guess it is a big deal. I guess we'll just wait a few months to find out. Hope I don't get bored of the game and story by then. Compare that to, wow, look at that planet in the sky. That can't be good. I wonder what we'll find on that when we get there. It's going to be badass. And I think most of us can understand why 7.1 was much more satisfying as a player and generated a lot more excitement about what was going to happen. This Chains of Domination cinematic, I would place somewhere between the two on that scale. There's not a feeling of, I basically don't know what happened, I have no idea what to expect next, that Nazjatar gave us, but nor did I get my Argus moment of having something very explicit and specific that I could look forward to either. And that is why I felt disappointed. Because it's great when you finish a cinematic or story beat with questions. If you also don't get a steady enough stream of answers, then those questions lose their impact and intrigue after a while. And in this cinematic, big questions to come away from a story beat which is supposed to provide a bit more resolution than that, in my opinion. Now, it's worth noting at this point that the final chapter of the Covenant campaign in 9.1, which rather suspiciously hasn't been on the PTR yet, is called What Lies Ahead, which, you know, sounds like it might be getting ready to fulfill my wish, but that's in 6 weeks' time, and I'm not trying to get my hopes up, and even then, it doesn't detract from my disappointment that it wasn't part of this cinematic. That being said though, on repeated viewings, I was able to find plenty about this cinematic that I really like, and first of all, the thing I love most about it is, we lose. We have categorically failed in our objective in this raid. This jailer has succeeded in his plan. He has expanded the moor to allow him to get to Oribos, and the very first shot in this cinematic is that moment of triumph for him. As he rips the orb out of the Arbiter and takes it for himself. Now, a couple of things about this. For one, the Arbiter certainly appears to be dead now. Like, as he takes the orb with the Ouroboros etchings on it, the Orbiborus, if you will, then the Arbiter basically dissolves, evaporates, which certainly makes me think that this is one ex-Arbiter right here, and that in itself tells us a lot that we didn't know for certain before. The jailer refers to taking back what was taken from him, which means, as many speculated, this orb was originally part of the jailer and was presumably taken from him, from his chest, when the other Eternal Ones banished him to the moor. That also implies that the Arbiter didn't exist before the jailer was banished to the moor, and that she was, in fact, a construct made by the other Eternal Ones. So does that mean that the jailer was the Arbiter? Zovaal was the OG sorting hat in charge of sending souls to their correct covenant. It's certainly possible. It's also possible that there was a whole other original Arbiter, and when Zovaal decided to kill his fellow Eternal Ones and take their sigils, that he started with that Arbiter, which would be another interesting possibility and would mean Zovaal has now killed 2 Arbiters. And as Zovaal takes back the final key and his stolen power, Sylvanas is happy. Her side has won. Now she and the jailer can go about the serious business of deconstructing reality and remaking it without the confines of life and death. A smile on her face that doesn't last long. As the jailer dons his armor and regains presumably the appearance that he must have had before he was banished, because as Sylvanas looks up at the face of her ally, Zovaal, what does she see? But basically the Lich King staring back at her, her most hated enemy. And like, Sylvanas knows that Zovaal created the Lich King. It's not a surprise that he created it in his own image, but there's a difference between knowing something and actually then seeing it in reality. Like, you know how sausages are made, but you'd still probably have a little moment of shock if you had to actually stand and watch sausages being made, you know? And I've got to say that the design for Zovaal's armor absolutely slaps. Our boy finally covers his nips and gets some shoes, proving that he's not a Tauren or a troll. So, you know, more info there. But I think Zovaal really comes into his own as a big baddie in this sequence, and I think his sexy Lich King armor is definitely part of that. I've heard people say that they think it has a Drust-like quality about it, and I can see that. That way it is shattered around his ripped chest does look kind of drusty, but I don't think that's a purposeful design choice, if I'm honest. And then comes the closest this cinematic gets to its Argus in the sky moment, the opening of Zovaal's portal. And it's worth taking a little moment just to identify exactly where Zovaal is standing here. He is standing on the symbol of his old covenant. On the Arbiter's platform, there is a symbol for each of the main covenants, and we know that each platform has a link to each zone because they use them for their video conference calls when shit gets real, and there is one that is smashed out. I've heard a lot of people in the past say that they thought this was the covenant symbol for the Maw, and the Eternal Ones smashed it to lock Zovaal in there, but I've always said that for me it's obviously the platform for Zovaal's old covenant, the one he was in charge of before he was banished to the Maw, and I think this cinematic proves that is the case, because it is on this platform that Zovaal is standing when he regains his true form, and on this platform that the portal appears behind him, which means, guys, I think this portal goes to Zovaal's original Covenant zone, and that is interesting by itself, but what makes it even better is what this portal looks like, because basically it looks like nothing else in the game. It's yellow, and so you think, oh, the light, but it looks really organized and constructed, so you think, oh, Titans. And basically, I think it's neither of those. It is absolutely its own thing. And it may even be giving us some hint as to what the aesthetic for Zovaal's home zone will look like too. Look, I know this is weird, but when I saw this, a word popped into my head, like an association thing. And that word was clockmaker. Just something about how complicated and precise and mechanical those movements seem. And then I listened close to the music playing in most of this cinematic, and it's awesome, by the way, but it's also got a relentless driving rhythm to build up tension. But because of that rhythmic time signature, it reminds me a little of the ticking of a clock.
The way is open, Zovaal! We already have what we need!
And then I thought about the only other named zone we know about in the Shadowlands, Craftenium, which is mentioned on the Sinstone of Archetus the Mad Designer in Revendreth. Is it possible that Craftenium is the Jailer's OG Covenant? Probably a bit of a stretch, I know, but I like stretching, it's fun. But whatever the zone actually is, I feel that is probably the portal to it, and probably our destination in some form or another in 9.2. So not quite an Argus in the sky, but something. And then comes the most important part of this cinematic.
The way is open, Zovaal! We already have what we need!
And this is going to take some talking about, I'm afraid. It's a very important reveal about the Jailer, not to us so much as to Sylvanas, because it informs everything that she does next.
Too long I endured the Maker's flawed design. I will forge a new reality where all shall soon.
And you know, maybe you are one of the many people who dislike this cinematic because you just can't believe that Sylvanas ever thought the Jailer had any good intentions at all, or that she's an idiot because she never realized that the Jailer's whole thing is domination. And that's fine, but it's also a little bit unfair in my opinion, because Blizz have worked really hard to explicitly show us her thought process throughout Shadowlands. So we're just going to take a quick little tour to have a look at some of those moments, starting with the No More Lies cinematic.
You are a weapon we will use to achieve our ends.
Where Sylvanas lays out exactly why she is on the Jailer's side.
We're breaking a system that has always been flawed and remaking it into one that is just. Every decision is made for us. Then, the afterlife decides what eternity we must endure. But through the Jailer, control of our fate will at last be possible.
She thinks the cycle of life and death is unfair. It robs every soul of any kind of control or self-determination, and she genuinely thinks that the Jailer wants to deconstruct that system and free everyone from it. In her opinion, a benefit to every being in existence, but especially to her, who understandably is very bitter about the lack of determinism she has had in her own fate. Now, whether she flat out believes this, or whether she has persuaded herself she believes it because she really doesn't have any other choice, the fact is, she believes it.
We've never had free will, little lion. But that is about to change.
That's why she is so confident she can convince Anduin to join their side.
Leave him to me. You've seen what he is capable of when he believes in the cause.
She considers Anduin a good, pure soul. When the jailer said he needed the goodest, purest soul to infiltrate the Kyrian and take the Archon sigil, she suggested Anduin, Jaina, Thrall and Bane as potential candidates, which is the whole reason they were kidnapped in the first place. And if she thinks she can persuade the goodest soul to join them, she must genuinely think that her cause is good. The only problem is, the jailer is basically lying to her.
You just needed to obey.
Because Sire Denathrius seems to think the plan is a little different, and that the objective is not to abolish life and death, but to actually just make death the total master of everything else.
The only power that will emerge from this torrent of change is death. Death and those who shaped its victory.
So the jailer is definitely lying to one of them, and there are growing red flags throughout Sylvanas' story in Shadowlands that eventually leave her in a position where she can't deny it to herself anymore. Like when she asks the jailer how they're going to rescue Denathrius, and he's all like, nah, we won't, that guy's done.
Sire Denathrius has been taken prisoner. What is our plan to recover him?
Every soul has its purpose. Denathrius has fulfilled his.
Or when the jailer allows her to try to convince Anduin to join them for exactly as long as it takes him to make the Mournblade and dominate him.
He's not ready.
Then a more direct approach is necessary.
Or how, even after the reason that they dominated Anduin, infiltrating Elysian Hold, is fulfilled, the jailer doesn't undominate him again. And you might well say, yeah, but Taliesin, you have to be stupid to believe that the jailer isn't a total wrong-'un with all this stuff going on. But honestly, it's a pretty standard human behaviour that you see people do all of the time. Denying obvious truth to yourself so that what you want to be true can still stay true, and doubling down on that if anyone points out that you're wrong.
Because if you can get me to let go of hope, you finally can too.
Enough! Submit!
Like, when someone blatantly knows that their boyfriend is cheating on them, as long as their boyfriend denies it, that gives them all the excuse they need to keep convincing themselves that the thing they want or need to be true is true.
I've not come this far to falter now.
Or, for a more appropriately high-stakes example, we know that our leaders, like, say, Winston Churchill, do genocides and commit war crimes, and we know that's bad, but we're okay with it because we believe our side is in the right. And what else are you gonna do? Let the other side, the wrong side, win? Like, yeah, we may have let off a couple of nuclear bombs and killed a few tens of thousands of innocent civilians and all that, and that's definitely bad, but it's a means to an end, right? And yeah, dominating Anduin is anathema to Sylvanas, but if it results in her and Zovaal winning and freeing everyone from the prison of the cycle of life and death, then it's a means to an end. Which brings us back to this moment, because the jailer has won. There is nothing to stop him yeeting off and getting on with the job of deconstructing and remaking reality, but he goes and dominates a bunch of people anyway, because of course he does, because he likes it, and he doesn't really want to free everyone, as Sylvanas has convinced herself that he does. He just wants to rule everyone, just like Denathrius thought. And by everyone, that of course means Sylvanas too.
Too long I endured the Maker's flawed design. I will forge a new reality where all shall serve.
And this is the moment that Sylvanas can delude herself no longer. As the jailer says he will forge a new reality, Sylvanas looks at the dominated Anduin. This is the reality that he's going to forge. Not one where souls are liberated and have freedom of choice, but one where they are bound in servitude to her boss. She knows it, just like that partner always knew that their boyfriend was a cheat, but now there is nothing left she can use to convince herself otherwise. He literally says, all will serve me, like he's really putting his cards on the table here. The echoing voice of Arthas and the Lich King flash through Sylvanas' mind.
Serve.
reminding her of the pain and injustice that started her journey, and maybe a foreshadow of the future in-game. Like, it can't help just to remind you of Arthas, you know? Just remind you that he exists, he's still there. And then the betrayal.
I will never serve.
What I like about this moment, where Sylvanas does what she was always going to have to do eventually and stand up to the jailer, is how basically undramatic it is. There's something weary about it, matter of fact about it. It doesn't feel like a grand gesture or even a genuine attempt at stopping Zovaal. She knows this arrow ain't gonna do it. More than likely, she's pretty sure that this action will result in Zovaal instantly tearing her apart, but she does it anyway. She is now finally able to admit to herself that she was wrong, that she was fooling herself. To use our getting old boyfriend analogy, she finally walked in on him having an orgy with a bunch of other people. And this is important. There's nothing selfless about this. She could try and save the others, but she doesn't care about them. She just shoots the jailer. It's a hopeless act. The act of someone who is disgusted by everything and just wants it to be over. All this is true, but it still doesn't make the jailer catching the arrow any less cool. And I absolutely love the following exchange. It once again cements the jailer as a top uber bad, this emotionless reaction, and the huge pause before he just says,
I will never serve.
I love how after that moment of rather half-hearted betrayal, the inexorable, relentless clock-like music starts up again. This act hasn't changed anything. The path and destination is still the same. The jailer is still inevitable. The dynamism of the camera as it swoops round to dominated Anduin, holding the Morn blade to Sylvanas' throat, mirroring how she held it to his in the Sylvanas' choice cinematic. She made the wrong choice, and now that choice is holding a blade to her throat. And then Zovaal gives back something that was stolen from her.
You did help restore something stolen from me. Allow me to repay you in kind.
And that something is clearly something to do with her soul. And obviously, if you've read the Folk and Fairy Tales book, or been keeping up with the Covenant stories, or even if you've read the flavor text on her mythic mount, then you know exactly what this is. A part of Sylvanas' shattered soul that the jailer has been keeping. Sylvanas lost a part of herself the day Arthas took her life, and the darkness grew within her to fill the void. So here Zovaal is restoring the missing part of her soul, and I think the cinematic shows that quite well. The soul itself and the scream that accompanies it draws from the Sylvanas Warbringers cinematic that also showed her soul leaving her body in the first place. That's what's happening, but we don't need to know that. It's not important to the action of this cinematic, and when it is important later, it will presumably be explained. For now, the important thing is that the jailer has returned something to her, like she helped return something to him. And then he has left this traitor and the gang of goodies that were trying to stop him alive. And why would he do that?
To their mercy. Come, be the first to witness reality's end.
Is it a genuine act of kindness? Absolutely not. The jailer is about to unmake existence and become its ruler. Metaphorically, he is the Ark, and the only way to not be drowned in the coming flood is to be on the Ark. So someone who he has been gracious enough to allow onto the Ark turns around and is like, I will never leave my house. And he's like, still bound to your house. Fine, go back to your house. That person is already dead in his mind. They are no longer on the Ark. And giving her her soul back, that's like giving her an umbrella. It is an act of cruelty to spare Sylvanas and leave her to the mercy of the others. I mean, it will eventually result in his defeat, obviously, because he's a baddie in a video game, but his reasoning is pretty clear, is what I'm saying. And off he pops with Anduin into 9.2, and Anduin drops his father's compass, which we first saw in the opening cinematic of Legion. Our second sign that there is a sliver of genuine Anduin still there under his controlled ragdoll puppet jailer vessel dead-eyedness. And obviously, symbolically, a compass literally shows you which direction to travel in. It helps you find your way. This is clearly something that Anduin leaves so that we can follow him, and something again that we will see addressed in the last Covenant campaign quest. And as a final shot of the cinematic, as the goodies approach the prone Sylvanas, and she looks up, revealing her blue eyes, her high elf blue eyes, because her soul has been restored, and for the first time since she was killed in Warcraft 3, the whole of Sylvanas Windrunner is back. Is she still undead? Yes, almost certainly. Is she still a banshee? Maybe? Probably, but who knows? Is she different and about to become a goodie and do everything she can to save us? Probably not, to be fair. Remember, she hasn't done anything selfless in this whole cinematic. There has been no redemption or even attempt at redemption, but the situation has changed, and out of everyone that we have access to in the Shadowlands, Sylvanas is the one with the most knowledge of what the jailer's plans are, where he is going, and what his next move is. So, good or bad, redeemed or not, Sylvanas is very useful to us right now.
Cannot let him reach me.
The end of that sentence would appear to be the sepulchre based on Keeper dialogue after the raid. It's a MacGuffin, we can find out the details about it later. For now, I really like how the camera follows her down as she collapses, and as she loses consciousness, that is the end of the cinematic. As she blacks out, so the screen goes black, and we suddenly realise that, yeah, this whole cinematic has been shown from her perspective. That opening shot where we see the Arbiter disappear and the orb travel to Zovaal, the camera is in her eyeline, and when she floats into shot, it is from the camera. We focus on her reactions throughout. When we see the jailer, it is from below, not just to emphasise his power in victory, but because, again, that is Sylvanas' perspective. We look at what she looks at. We are over her shoulder when the arrow is fired. It has been carefully putting us in her shoes throughout to really emphasize her journey throughout the action, her thought process, her change of objective. It's actually really clever and subtle and very well done. So my final thoughts in summary. As a cinematic, it is the usual masterfully put together work we are really starting to take for granted now. Beautifully made, exciting, and important feeling. From a story perspective, it's not what I'd have done, but that doesn't make it bad. I like the little things it does explain, like the Arbiter using the banished Zovaal's power. I don't really buy the criticism that Sylvanas' motivations or arc and events that led to the arrow moment aren't sufficiently explained or set up or believable. I think to the contrary, Blizz have actually worked really hard to show exactly why Sylvanas is willing to fool herself into believing the jailer, and subjectively, I think they've done that really well. Overall, I am disappointed because I didn't get my explicit Brechtian reveal about 9.2, but I did get some pretty good hints to work with, like the portal, and I really like the Anduin breadcrumb that gets dropped too. The Sylvanas situation is a very delicate one, story-wise, and I'm interested in seeing how Blizz handle it. I think a lot of people are making a lot of assumptions right now, and getting angry about those assumptions, rather than what the game and the cinematics have actually shown us. And that's natural, that's only human, we all do that. But now Sylvanas is here, in our custody. There's no denying that the story writers are about to start walking through a minefield. It's going to take some careful negotiation. But that's enough about me. What do you think of the Chains of Domination cinematic? Did it scratch the itch you needed it to scratch? Did it give you the resolution that it needed to give you? Did it do what you expected, or did it surprise you? I've spent the last day reading opinions on this cinematic, but I would love to read yours, so please let us know in the comments below. And thanks for joining us for this video. If you liked it, don't thank us. Thank our patrons who give their actual real-life money to make all of our work happen. Guys, genuinely, thank you. Without you, there would be a whole lot less Taliesin Evitel. If you didn't like it, downvote the shit out of it. Remember, my name is Anne Stickney. No, my name is Taliesin, from me and Evitel and the Nyrin too. Until next time, cheerio.